Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Unmasking the Dark Side, Episode 13. So, if you have not been watching this series and you're just coming to this video, it would be awesome if you went back and got caught up before you watched this video and watched all of the series. I know it's a big commitment, but what you will find out is that I have uncovered and unmasked a conspiracy, a religious ideology, the ideology of Luciferianism, which has survived somehow down through the ages. I've traced this religion all the way back to Atlantis. I've shown you how it survived the flood, how it became pervasive and almost took over the planet, then got pushed back by the powers of light. And even though Christianity, from the Crusades through the Spanish Inquisition and into the witch trials of Salem, have tried to suppress and do away with this ideology, but somehow it has survived. And not only that, I've showed you in the previous video how this ideology has infiltrated every other religion until all religions have become tainted and poisoned by this false religion. I've showed you how this religion of Luciferianism has infiltrated all areas of life: government, religion, society, television, movie, video, and music. So, how did this modern resurgence occur? We've looked at all of the ancient evidence, but who is responsible for promoting this in the current day? And how did we get from a primarily Christian society to now what is arguably a primarily pagan society? And I think that there's one person who would be tickled pink, honestly, to know that she was responsible for most of this. And although I can't say that she was necessarily a Luciferian, she taught what is called a core religion, or a center religion, or a universal faith. And this universal faith is what I've been talking about. It is Luciferianism, although it disguises itself in many forms. And what she found was this thread of infiltration. And she saw it as a thread of truth. She saw this relationship between all of the different religions and how that's, in some ways, some of them all say the same thing. And she thought that that was uncovering a truth, a thread of truth. But what she was seeing was this unending thread of infiltration, that every religion has been infiltrated by Luciferianism. And I don't even think she realized what she was seeing. So let's talk about this person now. Who am I talking about? A name you might find familiar, or you may be hearing for the very first time. I'm talking about Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, also known as Madame Blavatsky. Try to say that 3 times fast. She, along with some other people, founded a thing called the Theosophical Society in 1875 that is still a major organization and still occupies 257 acres in Chennai, India. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was born in 1831 in southern Russia as an aristocrat. So being raised in an aristocratic and rich home, she had access to libraries and books that common people did not have access to. And she became obsessed with the occult practices and histories at a very early age. Madame Blavatsky was said to have exhibited psychic abilities from a very early age, and her parents encouraged her then to avail herself of any resources to discover more deeply the occult, and she was encouraged to engage in occultic behavior, activities, and ceremonies. And so she did have an arranged marriage, and it was very brief and ended in divorce. She simply would not submit to a husband. And so instead she set out on a quest to acquire occultic knowledge. And because she had the resources of a rich family, she was able to do this in style. So Madame Blavatsky came to America, and she lived with Native American tribes trying to discover the ancient history of their religion and their mythologies. She also went to Greece, Egypt, and all of Europe doing the same thing in search of these ancient religions. She was even involved in various different movements as she went. And when she was in Italy, she ended up somehow She ended up in Giuseppe Garibaldi's army, and she was involved in the reunification of Italy, and she was one of Garibaldi's red shirts who actually engaged in the Battle of Mantana to free Rome from papal control, and she actually fought the very last remnants of a papal army. That there was a papal army still in existence when she got involved in this fight in 1867, and her and the other Italian volunteer red shirts fought against the Pope's army and the French to free Rome from Italy. So she was a very interesting person who set out to live an interesting life. And although I've lived an interesting life, she had something I did not. Lots and lots of money. And no moral guidepost, I believe. So at any rate, so Madame Blavatsky would eventually return to the United States. And when she did, she got involved in what is known as the spiritualist movement. Now, the spiritualist movement was a time in American history during the Victorian era where people got very, and this is like the middle to late 1800s, early 1900s, people got very obsessed with seances and conjuring spirits and necromancy, the speaking to dead relatives. And so the old, here's an example. If you ever make it out to San Jose, California, then you might want to stop into a place called the Mystery Mansion, the Winchester Mystery Mansion. This is a sprawling estate with an enormous house that was built by a very rich little old widow lady who was the widow and the recipient of the Winchester rifle manufacturing organization, and that she carried a tremendous amount of guilt for all of the people, especially Native Americans, who were killed by the Winchester rifle. And so she was very involved in spiritualism and the occult. In fact, if you tour her very strange house, you will see all of these various rooms where she held these occultic seances. And she believed that she was being haunted by Native American spirits, and so she thought that the sound of hammers and saws and workmen would keep the evil spirits away, so she began to build on her mansion around the clock 24/7 to drive these evil spirits away so that she could have some peace. And this is why you have stairwells that go into the ceiling, they go nowhere. You have doors that open up into 3-story drops. You have beautiful ornate cabinets that you open up, and they're just a brick wall. There's nothing to put in there, because she did not have an architect planning all of this. She just had workmen, and she just said, it doesn't matter what you build, just keep building. So this is representational of what was going on in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s in America and Europe, and it is known as the occultic revival. Now, Blavatsky was going around to these seances, and in some ways she was debunking them. She was acknowledging that the phenomenon, like tables levitating and, things moving around the room and lights going on and off, she was able to confirm in most of these cases that this was a real phenomenon, but she did not believe that it was spirits. She believed it was the power of the mind of the person who was doing the seance and the collective group. And that she claimed to be able to do this and create these psychic phenomenon without conjuring spirits, just through the power of her own mind. So she went around to these various different events, and she ended up meeting a man named Henry Olcott, a former not Revolutionary War, Civil War, a former Civil War colonel. And they shared an interest in the spiritualist movement, and they started going around together. And together they combined the spiritualism with mediums and ghosts and all of that. They combined that ideology with Buddhism, Hinduism, and Eastern Indian philosophy. And so they had this ancient occultic practices and philosophy and science all mixed up together in this thing that they called Theosophy. The thing is, though, Theosophy became very, very influenced by and integrated with Freemasonry. And that is because Olcott was a practicing Freemason. And many people say that Blavatsky taught these occultic practices where Olcott organized them. So the organization of the Theosophical Society starts to look a lot like Freemasonry, and you can see Freemasonry elements leaking into Blavatsky's writing later on as well because of her influence from Olcott. So what are some of her teachings? Well, her first book, published in 1877, tells a lot about what she believed just in the title, Isis Unveiled. So many people consider Isis Unveiled, her first work, to be an encyclopedia of occultic and lost religious practices and knowledge. And I want to stop here before I go into explaining what Madame Blavatsky taught, and I want to tell you that in these false religions, there is a definite seductive air. There is this element of illumination, of seduction. It can draw you in. Many good Christian men have been sucked into various different false teachings and false religions because it tickles the ear, and some of it seems very logical, and it's not by accident. It's a demonic plan. So before I talk much more about Blavatsky, I want you to understand, to listen to this very carefully, but also very discriminatively. And I want you to put a little bit of a guard up against some of these teachings because they can draw you in and you can start to believe them yourself. So another thing, okay, so what did she really teach? She teach that there was a core religion, that all religions were essentially the same, and that all of these religions come from a core religion which goes all the way back to Atlantis. And that regardless of what your personal faith and ideology is, that she said at the core of this is a truth that is evident in all religions. Now, the thing about Madame Blavatsky is that she wasn't just a teacher and a writer. She also was capable of producing psychic phenomenon. Blavatsky was said to be capable of telekinesis. That's the ability to move objects around a room without anyone touching them. The other thing, probably the strangest thing that she could do was different forms of materialization, where she was said to have just caused a cup to appear out of thin air. She's said to have caused gold and silver coins to just appear out of thin air. And most interestingly, I think, is that all of her writings, she said she received directly from ascended masters she called Mahatmas. And these were these Indian sages, Indian gurus. Mahatmas were ascended beings who had found enlightenment, and now they were communicating with her through the spirit realm. And she was said to be able to materialize before your very eyes a blank piece of paper and make words appear on it. And that she could just do out a whole book from blank pages of paper, and you could sit and watch the words appear. So this occultic behavior and ability does seem to smack of witchcraft, to be quite honest with you. So many people believed her because of this, and she built a big following. But at the same time, during this period, there was a lot of people whose job and goal in life was to debunk this spiritualism that was going around in the late 1800s. Harry Houdini, the famous magician, wanted to be able to reach out to the other side and speak to dead relatives. But he also began to realize that most all of these spiritualists were complete frauds, and there was, it was a lever under the table that caused it to go up and down, or, they had a switch, or there was smoke and mirrors, there was some other accomplice involved, and he began to go around debunking these various psychic and occultic events, and he was a big debunker, and there were a lot of them like him. There were a lot of people like him who made it their job going around debunking and labeling these people as frauds, and they made it around to Blavatsky. Some will argue that she was set up, that the person lied, that the various people that labeled her a fraud were lying about her. But there was a series of psychic debunkers that called her a fraud, and she wanted to fight them. She wanted to take them to court, but the Theosophical Society, the other members, thought that that was not a good idea. And since their ideology was not tied up in Madame Blavatsky's psychic phenomenon, she had used that to gain people's attention. But the Theosophical Society didn't see a value in it beyond that, and so they didn't want to back her up. And so she became bitter and angry, and she withdrew from the Theosophical Society, which occupied that large compound in India, and she went back to Europe, where she continued to write. And she wrote 3 more books, the first one being The Secret Doctrine. Now, what The Secret Doctrine does is it takes the core of all of Earth's religions, and it traces them back all the way to Atlantis. She claims that this is the universal religion that is true throughout the universe, that it even transcends Earth itself. But what I believe she was seeing was the red dragon, red shield, serpent cult thread of infiltration. That I believe she was seeing this infiltration. And that's the thing that she's traced back all the way to Atlantis. That it's not the core of my faith. It's a outside contaminant that's gotten into my faith. That the thing that she discovered in all of these religions is this interference by this demonic force who seeks to insert itself into every religion. And it's straight up the earmark and signature of the demonic. So, Madame Blavatsky would write 2 more books, The Key to Theosophy and The Voice of Silence. And what you need to know is that she claimed that all of her ideas were not her ideas, that none of her ideas were her ideas, that they had all been given to her by these ascended masters, these Mahatmas, through psychic channeling, and sometimes manifesting materials out of thin air. And she called it this the ancient wisdom religion of Atlantis. She claimed it was the root of all religions, and she saw herself as a messianic figure. See, she believed that this religion, once it was uncovered and everyone could understand that it's in all religions, therefore it must be true. That is the assumption she made that jumped the shark, that just because it's there in all religions does not mean that that is the truth. It means that that is that was by intention, that all religions were being infiltrated by another religion, and I would not call it the root of it, but rather the poison of it, the contamination of all religions. And she saw herself as messianic because she believed that once people figured out her root religion and its ideologies, that it would take all the world over, that all the world would convert, and that one world religion would emerge, because she believed that her truth was that universal, that it would encompass all faiths. And she saw it envisioned a day when everyone would lay down all of the rest of their religion and just accept the one common thread that we all share, and then form that into one cohesive religion. And she believed she would be sitting there in even post-mortem, that she would be seen as the founder of this new universal global religion. Now, she had other theories besides uncovering the root religion. She uncovered root races. There were, I think there were, 8 root races, and I think 7 sub-races. Her races start with the Hyperboreans. Hyperboreans, according to Blavatsky, didn't even have bodies. They were just spirit beings or angels, that they occupied the earth first, and then there were the Lemurians, whose kingdom was out of what we call now Australia. She went on to talk about how Atlantis was the next race of people to evolve on the planet, and that Atlanteans were human but with a heavy spirit to them as well, a heavy spiritual element. And then the Atlanteans gave birth to the Aryans, who were survivors of the Great Flood and who settled in places like Basque and I can't remember the name of that other group on the other side of the straits. But at any rate, she believed we were living in the Aryan age now, and that there were 3 more species, 3 more races yet to be evolved from the human race. And she, made me think of soy boys. I've talked about I talked about how the new generation of people don't seem like even the same species. Standing next to them, I look like a scary caveman, and they look like some kind of little gray hybrid. Maybe that's actually happening. Do. So what is Madame Blavatsky's legacy? Well, most people consider her the central figure in the 19th century occultic revival. She was a contributor to Nazi eugenics, that some of this ideology of the subspecies or subraces of humankind led Hitler to commit his atrocities against Jews and Gypsies and other races in Nazi Germany. And whether, she died not realizing that she would contribute to genocide with her ideologies. People consider Madame Blavatsky the author of the New Age movement, and probably her most ominous legacy would be a thing called the Lucis Trust. So the Lucis Trust is directly related now to the New World Order. It is an organization that is still active today, and anything and everything that the United Nations has to say about religion comes from the Lucis Trust. The Lucis Trust was founded by a woman named Alice A. Bailey. She was born in 1880 and died in 1949. Now, she said that she was also a devotee and a disciple of Madame Blavatsky. And Alice Bailey followed in Blavatsky's example. And she psychically channeled these masters from antiquity, these ascended beings. And she also claimed that all of her 25 books that she wrote were given to her by an ascended master called the Tibetan, or DK, which she would later say stands for Dwal Kul. And after a failed marriage, much like Blavatsky, she remarried again, though, to a 32nd degree Mason named Foster Bailey. And they founded an occultic magazine called The Beacon and a publishing company called Lucifer's Trust. So Alice Bailey is definitely a Luciferian. There might have been some question about Blavatsky, but Alice Bailey recognized that it was this Luciferian element, this Gnostic element, that this red dragon worship, serpent worship, was at the core, and she embraced it. And part of this has to do with her deep involvement with Freemasonry as well, which we know have been worshiping Lucifer since the very beginning. They would later change the Lucifer Trust to the name Lucis Trust, and the publishing company mainly published Alice Bailey's 25 books that were written by channeled spirits, and all of the writings of her hero Blavatsky, and all the letters that Blavatsky would write. Her teachings, Bailey's teachings, definitely involved end times eschatology. She saw this universal world religion as the entity that would take over the planet, and that it would bring about the emergence of her Messiah. Which, the thing about Alice Bailey is that she mixed so many different ideas, like Christianity and Freemasonry and Theosophy and paganism, and so the words and the language she uses can be quite confusing, and in many cases Alice Bailey sounds like she's a Christian, and her Messiah, or Christ, she calls the cosmic Christ, but we know him as Lucifer, and we would know him as the Antichrist. And so she saw the Antichrist coming back once we have combined all of our governments into one world government and all of our religions into the one core universal religion. To summarize her ideas, Bailey's ideas included the root religion from Blavatsky, the mystery Babylon religion from antiquity. It involved the Gnostic flip of the demiurge, where Lucifer's the good guy and God is somehow the bad guy, and it was Lucifer that set him free in the garden. The Eden lie, I like to call it, that you will be like God, that you can be like God, that you are little gods, that God isn't real but you are. That attitude and ideology is all through her writing. It's Blavatsky's teachings taken to their future ends when combined with one world government ambitions of Freemasons like Albert Pike. So the connective tissue of the root religion, the thread of similarities to Christianity, and the root of Freemasonry is at its core. It's serpent worship. The Gnostic lie that the real hero is Lucifer, and that and that they believe that he will return to Earth to set up a new universal kingdom and religion. So they believe that the returning Christ is actually Lucifer. And it's this intentional misleading commingling of terms that will confuse many Christians to believe the cosmic Christ is the second coming, when the cosmic Christ is in fact Lucifer, is in fact the Antichrist, is what we would call him. But the familiarity of worship in the styles and liturgy of this new religion will seem very familiar to most Christians. Not because they are imitating Christianity, but because those elements of Christianity, the red robes, the mitre hat, all of the pomp and circumstances, are not Christian in nature, but are pagan in nature, and they come from the root religion. And it is a sign of the infiltration of the root religion into our own faith of Christianity. And so because it seems familiar, many Christians will sign on, because the language of a cosmic Christ and things like that is very deceiving. So even the elect might be deceived into this new religion. And, you know, the solemn dark Masonic rituals with a bishop-like character dressed in all red, as seen in Eyes Wide Shut, the Stanley Kubrick movie, that is because that is the root of their faith, their religion. That's what their religion looks like. Christianity and Catholicism looks like that because they infiltrated it and made it look that way. That's not inherently Christian symbolism. That's inherently pagan symbolism that is alive and well, and you can see it in Stanley Kubrick in the Eyes Wide Shut movie. That those ceremonies weren't emulating Christianity. Those ceremonies were original and authentic to their original religion, and what you see in Christianity is a mirroring of that demonic original religion, and how it's infiltrated into the Latin form of Christianity, and how that has even survived into Protestant churches through the order of service and much of the religious ceremonies that take place, including holiday ceremonies, which are pagan in origin. So Blavatsky's root religion of the Atlanta Mystery Babylon has infiltrated the church from almost the beginning. And the Lucis Trust, which is really the grandchild of Blavatsky, the child of Alice Bailey, the Lucis Trust is the UN's sole authority today on all things religious. And the concept of ecumenicalism, or what I was involved with for a short time called the convergence movement, is the idea of putting all Christian churches together. And the thing is that they want to become universal churches. That's the goal, is to make all churches universal churches, and therefore make them accept the Eden lie, make them accept Luciferianism either covertly or overtly. And the idea to have a one world religion and a one world government, which means the end of our personal freedom, the end of our personal religions, the end of our personal faith, the end of our personal freedoms. This is the biggest threat the world has ever seen. Globalism is demonic. Globalism is what is behind all of the pain and suffering and war in the world. And that if we were allowed to just coexist without integration, they want to integrate us into a single mind, a single hive mind. This is why the internet was invented, to draw all of our brains into a brain trust, so that instead of having a planet of individuals, we have a single planet with a single idea and a single personality. It's the collective mindset, it is the hive mentality, and it is the death of original humans. It is the death of personalities and individuality and personal freedom. I want you to examine this root religion and ask yourself, do I practice paganism? Is this infiltrated my thinking? Am I part of this problem? Is this something that we should stop, and can we stop it? I believe that we can, through prayer and perseverance, and by shining a light on the darkness. So join me next time as we continue to unmask the dark side.